Blood Liminal by C.O. Ebert, appearing in the short story collection Hades' Ascendant and Others, more weird tales from the Ophiliaverse. And should a peasant cure ye kin ye livestock of malaflic or affliction by the old ways, use those same ways to drive a beast your boggle from your land, and if not that peasant asks for monetary recompense, be a lenient lord, and avert your gaze thither away. Do not reward him, but though the church demand it, do not punish him either, though I wouldn't say such in the open. The worshippers of the old gods still have ways to deal with a disease, more importantly demon, that we Christians, my son, do not have. Alwyn, Christian king of the Saxons, letter to his son, Edwin, circa 776 AD. We've been walking for days, Irenaeus, said Aurelius, and I swear I've seen those same crags and trees enough times that I remember them better than my human mother's face. Take heart, General. We will feed soon, said the former bishop. In my time in Rome, I learned to follow the stars when I was an advisor to the Senate, and we have been following Polaris due north for a fortnight. Now, we have followed a straight course, not a circle. Yes, said Aurelius, a straight course through nothing. Oh, wait, I forget, 2 elderly pelt merchants. That the entire coven had to split between ourselves, and a stag who nearly pierced Polemachus through the heart when he attempted to feed on it out of desperation. What do you know, priest, of leading? Irenaeus silently chuckled to himself as he imagined the fledgling Polemachus being dispatched from this eternal unlife by a randy stag in musk. Irenaeus floated silently along the trail, as he was the only vampire of the 5 travelers to have developed the power of flight, albeit he used it now in a subdued fashion to match the walking gait of his companions, so as to not appear to mock his subordinates, on whom he only now had a tenuous grasp. He knew the former general, Aurelius, whom he had converted not even a full century ago, was considering making an attempt for leadership of the group. Traveling with the two was the North African poet Polemachus, a lover of Aurelius's whom the general had converted without the elder vampire's permission, and Helena, a courtesan flautist the general had become infatuated with, and had brought into the fold a few decades ago in Constantinople. Irenaeus found the general's open pansexuality distasteful, for he was, in his heart, still a bishop of the Holy Roman Church. These were not vampires who feared the cross. All but Aurelius, who worshipped only himself, would have called themselves Christians. They did not follow the Christianity of future centuries that illiterate peasants would use to illuminate the demon-haunted world around them. They followed an aggressive Roman Christianity that had forgotten the carpenter who founded it, and was now in a violent adolescent growth spurt for the last few centuries, since Constantinople converted the empire, and was being spread by the sword. Though the empire had fallen in the west, the faith was still being thrust upon pagan barbarians by the Eastern Empire in Constantinople, always encroaching farther into barbarian lands, but not this far. Helena and Polemachus had probably both entertained the idea of begging Aurelius to take his sword and behead them, as the cold, dry, barren lands they walked in depressed them so much that the destruction seemed a brighter option than enduring any more of this. Vampires did not need warmth, but they could still crave it. Vampires did not require verdant gardens and grottos, or starlight reflected in marble fountains whose waters would not reflect back their own undead visage, or the smell of spring blossoms and Italian roses carried on a gentle wind to complement the sanguine taste of the recently seduced and subdued youth or maiden they were feeding on. But Roman aristocrats did need these things, and that's what these vampires were. The last of the 5, and the only one with guaranteed loyalty to Irenaeus, was Johannes, a scribe and chronicler who the bishop had taken under his wing. He was a timid youth, not only by vampiric but even by human standards. The blunt, aggressive sexuality of Helena and Polemachus made him uneasy, and the bellicose, aggressive manner of the former 7th Legion General Gaius Germanicus Aurelius made him practically queasy with worry. Of course, this was mental, as the conversion to vampiric unlife renders the digestive organs inert, but that did not keep the boy from thinking he felt uneasy in his stomach, enough that it manifested psychosomatically. Indeed, if the Roman poets described the general boredom and melancholy of the living raised to a suicidal fever pitch as tedium vitae, then these 5 preachers, now walking through barbarian lands, were suffering tedium mortis. Some future Dracula, whose face was as rough as the craggy landscape, might slither and snake through the dark bowers until wolves howled in the desolate night, and winter winds froze the blood of the poor wretch he fed on, nearly as fast as he could drink. He would ominously revel in the dark night of centuries that had descended on mankind as the endless forest's apex predator until a new breed of human emboldened by reason dreamed up ways to dethrone him. But evolution takes time. The Dark Ages were so new, the umbilical cord to the world of the ancients was not even fully cut yet, and our travelers loathed the end of civilization as much as the Pope and the spice traders. When Odoacer, the Ostrogothic prince, captured Rome and Ravenna, like most of the old clans, Irenaeus's brood, then numbering 30, headed for Constantinople. But Constantinople had her vampire families already well established, and then when they grew tired of comparing fashions with their Western counterparts, they forced them to move on. Half the clan went with Ptolemaeus, a philosopher, who was at that time Irenaeus' second-in-command, to Alexandria. A few wayfarers broke out on their own, headed for Parthia, but Irenaeus began to believe legends of preserved Roman citadels in Britannia, far away from Odoacer's reach. And so the journey that he promised would take only a few weeks had stretched into a month and a half, and while he had no idea where he had led his clan to, they seemed to lose one of their number per week. They entered a steep valley, bordered by a line of evergreen trees on one side, a brown muddy stream on the other, and barren shale hillsides on the other far end. A single hut, long in style, like that of the Visigoths, but even more primitive, was the only sign that anything other than nature had ever set foot here. "Shall we plan for a frontal attack?" said the now starving Aurelius, drawing his sword. "Assuming it's not vacant," said Irenaeus. "Then it is a home, and we cannot enter uninvited, fool." "I know, old man," said Aurelius, "but my sword can. This is straw and pitch, Irenaeus, not a city wall. I can pick that place apart with my blade, held well out in front of me. I need not cross its boundaries. The rest of you will be ready to catch whatever quarry is inside when they flee." "The sun will soon be up, my general, and that humble hut will be the only thing we have to protect us," said Helena. "Perhaps," she said, sniffing the air, "I can be of some use. I shall get myself invited in from these dangerous environs." She stripped off her boots, leggings, and frock, then wearing only her shift, tore it a little and purposely muddied it with dirt. Finally, she turned to Polemachus, her rival for the general's affections, and invited him to inflict a few flesh wounds on her, which he did all too eagerly. They needed to be deep enough not to heal immediately. She ran to the hovel and, reaching the door, began to scream. "Help! I have been robbed. Thieves have attacked me. Oh, please entreat me to enter. I barely made it with my life and maidenhead intact. Oh, please," she said, barely able to not overact it. She pounded on the house's thin wooden door. "Let me enter." The door opened slowly. When she saw the sole human inhabitant, she could barely contain belly laughter. She had seen barbarians and Goths and Gauls since they had left Rome, but the old man who stood there before her was like a Roman child's exaggerated caricature of the uncivilized. She suspected that though she had stopped aging decades ago, the mortal fossil in front of her might be ultimately older. A cloud of gray matted hair surrounded him, beard and hair having long ago forgotten the borders between them. He wore an animal skin cloth wrapped about him, giving some form to his ancient body here and there, his skin greasy and dirt-caked, and the final accoutrement was an actual wildcat pelt, which he wore as a hood and a cloak. "Latin," he said in a barbarous accent, made worse by the loss of 3/4 of his teeth. "I haven't heard that since I was a slave." "Oh, merciful God," Helena said, realizing the plural would be better with this man. "Merciful gods, It was from the Romans that I escaped as a slave when Ravenna fell. I'm trying to make my way home to Britannia, but this very night and very long journey, I was attacked." "I don't know of Ravenna or Britannia, girl," said the old man, "and I hear tale Rome fell, but I do not know, nor does it concern me any more. You may come in, and I'll dress your wounds and give you some boots. You may sleep here, I'll not molest you, and come light, I'll help you make your way through the forest." "Oh," she said, stepping into the hut, "you'll need not worry about me by morning, kind sir." He shared his home with a hound as ancient as he was, who was scarcely able to open an eye from his sleeping place by the fire, 3 hens, and a mother and baby sheep. "Which road you travel by, girl?" the old man asked. But no answer came. He turned around to see the half-dressed Mediterranean beauty with her wounds already healed, her eyes dilated beyond human potential, and her canines grown to twice their prior size. "Irenaeus and Aurelius can fight over the sheep and the hens, but I'll take you for myself," she mewed. The old man reached under the hen closest to him and fetched from beneath her the egg she was brooding, and as Helena thrust for his neck, he smashed the egg in her face. If Helena had understood the old shaman's language, and she hadn't been in searing pain, she would have known that he uttered an invocation to the mother goddess of these hills to counter her undeath with the embodiment of potential life within the egg, but it mattered not. She stumbled backwards and reached for the door, making her way into the night. She was no more by the time the others made it to her. "What?" said Aurelius. "We can't die like this," said Polemachus. "A heathen sorcerer," cried Irenaeus. "Well," said Aurelius, with sword drawn, heading for the house, blinded by rage, to avenge his now dead lover, "I know how he will die." "No, you fool," said Irenaeus angrily, but his warning was unheeded. Aurelius barged in the door, stamping hard into the earthen floor of the house, and eyeing the ancient shaman he now knew to be Helena's killer, until a pain bashing at his skull forced him back out. This was not one of the old man's folk conjures, but the natural effect of a vampire who tries to violate the law of entering uninvited. He could, for a fraction of a moment, cross the threshold of a dwelling without invitation, just as a human so possessed could reach his hand into a burning kiln, but not for long before nature will enforce her rules by either pain, injury, or demise. Aurelius fell backwards, landing a few feet outside the entrance and taking the door with him. He slowly began to regain his composure and got to his feet. He didn't notice the baby sheep, frightened, had run out into the night. "Come out, old man," said Aurelius, "and I shall slay you by my sword rather than my fangs. I give you the chance to die like a man instead of being food." The old man stood in the doorway and calmly took a rock and 2 irregular rough iron nails. With the rock, he drove the nails into the footprints Aurelius had made immediately inside his doorway. Aurelius felt the pain from the right foot, and had only recovered from that when he felt the pain in the left joint. It was only then that he realized he was immobilized. The old man then took his ancient staff and began to chant again and again in his native tongue. Aurelius felt his eyes begin to go out of focus, and he only began to see clearly again as his acute night vision focused on the crescent moon. The old man had begged Father Sky to put on a private show just for Aurelius. He rhythmically cast his staff into Aurelius's footprints. The general would have sworn it appeared that the moon was swelling to fullness, without ever moving from its position, like a woman growing full with child. But then, in the full moon, he saw the old man's eyes gleaming, burning at him intently. Pain filled every inch of his flesh, and he could no longer say if the bright, now corona object in the sky was the moon or the sun. Father Sky gave Sister Moon a cloak to wear borrowed from Brother Sun, but for Aurelius, it meant only death. "Irenaeus!" gasped Polemachus. "Are we just to stand around while he picks us off one by one?" "I shall do something about this," said Irenaeus. And with that the vampire pulled from his satchel a jeweled crucifix. He flew this time, not bothering to restrain his power, to the opening the door. "Hear me, old man," said Irenaeus. "I drive your heathen magic out by the power of Jesus Christ, Iusus Christos, the one God of Rome, her people, her church, and her empire." Even if Jesus had been bothering to answer the prayers of vampiric killers that day, The old man paid no heed. Using his long and unkempt fingernails, he had pulled loose straws from the structure of the house and was fashioning a human-shaped figure out of them. Irenaeus began chanting Mass in proper Latin, waving the crucifix at the old man through the door, and the old man, when completed with his labors, shook the wicker figurine back at Irenaeus in mockery. The old man now seemed puzzled. The gold and diamond-encrusted corpse on the pole, for this is what the old man perceived the crucifix to be, with little knowledge of Christianity ever taught to him during his time as a slave in Rome, did seem to offer the vampire some protection from his tricks. So, as Irenaeus chanted on, the old man chanted silently and rocked back and forth. Irenaeus's chronicler, Johannes, the naive youth, was the conjure man's target now. Slowly the boy began to feel the psychosomatic pains that stress caused in his stomach and bowels to worsen. He began to pant, a wild but breathless undead pant. "I'm ill," he said, clutching at Polemachus. "You can't be sick, you insipid little wretch," the African vampire said to Johannes. "You're not even alive anymore." "I am sick," Johannes said emphatically, and with enough assurance that Polemachus's long-dormant mortal instincts to pull away from the potentially contagious were aroused, and he pushed the boy to the ground. The boy writhed and began to retch, but with no stomach contents to erupt forth. His atrophied organs began to come out of his throat one by one, reverting to black ichors as they left his body. Irenaeus prayed louder and the old man chanted louder, but both were muffled by the young vampire's screams. Finally, when Johannes coughed up his own ribs and heart, all action ceased. The ancient rhymer and the vampire bishop eyed each other through the open doorway, and a deathly silence fell on both of them, until the gentle braying of the baby sheep broke the silence. She was in Polemachus's arms, and his fangs were bared. The old man rose to his feet and spoke for the first time since he had seen through Helena's ruse. "Nay, demon, wait, demon." He now turned straight to Irenaeus. "There are my only family, kith and kin, demon, these beasts. Spare her. Have your many place her safe in my arms across the threshold and depart. Neither ye nor I need suffer any further losses this night." Irenaeus seemed to be considering the old man's offer for a moment, but Polemachus was not. He bit into the little lamb and drank its blood. The poor creature cried a muffled pain of agony, the first sound of a truly innocent thing to die so far this night. Irenaeus turned first to the feeding Polemachus, then to the old man, and saw first shock, then sadness, then a thirst for vengeance in the mortal's eyes. The old man began the rhythmic breathing that came before his conjures, and Irenaeus could see all the stress was beginning to wear on the old man's body. "If her blood ye want, demon," said the old man, as he took the straw figure and ran it over the mother sheep, "then her blood y'all be. But what else in these hills be wanting her blood?" Irenaeus watched in horror as Polemachus got down on all fours and began to baa like an animal, louder and louder. And in response, shadows shaped like wolves seemed to come from the dark evergreen forest. Brother Wolf's ancestor spirits had come, a pack of packs, to answer the old man's cry for justice. They tore Polemachus to pieces before Irenaeus's eyes, and for once the near invincibility of vampires was a detriment. The wolf shadows bit and rended, but always seemed careful not to separate skull from vertebrae or to bite Polemachus's heart. The shadows soon had a mist of gore around them and carried it up and away into the night with them. Irenaeus could not tell if Polemachus had been dispatched from the world or simply no longer made a sound, perhaps to go on dying forever in the mouths of the animal ghosts. Irenaeus might have had a short impulse to cut his losses and retreat, but his bloodlust was raised when he saw how weak the old man was, and like all predators, a weak prey only heightened arousal. The Roman soul within his undead heart only fed the bloodlust until all sense of reason was gone. The crucifix protected him. The old man killed his Johns. The old man was his enemy. The old man was pagan. The old man was barbarian. And the old man was, above all else, food. Irenaeus flew into the night, clutching the crucifix with one hand, and with the other arm began to pull at the pitch and tar house within human strength, hitting hard and slowly bringing it down. Pass after pass he made, few required before the humble structure began to crumble under his fury. The old man pushed his animals out into the night, giving each one a quick kiss to bless it in its new life out in the forest, and ran for the last trick he had left, a small cloth pouch tied with a string. The few metal cooking bowls he had and wood supports for the little house now fell on him, and the poor healer, the poor former slave, began to suffer countless tiny lacerations and bruises on his ancient and tired body. But he had one thing to do before he joined ghosts of family and friends and ancestors from a village he was taken from all those years ago and could barely remember. A final task before going to great forever springtime. One last demon to dispatch before his bones rested back in Mother Earth's womb and his soul climbed up to Father Sky. The old man shielded his already badly concussed head as best he could and untied the little pouch, but kept it pinched shut slightly between his fingers. By now the little house was only rubble, Irenaeus able to enter it freely, as this disastrous wreckage was by no means any longer a home. He found the old man cowering and picked him up by the throat with only one hand. The vampire bared his fangs and lifted the ancient conjurer in the air. "And to think you barbarian beasts brought Rome down. I am a priest. Anything to confess before you die? Or would you like to receive the blood of Christ before I receive yours?" Irenaeus mocked. The old man gasped for air, unable to speak. Irenaeus was impressed the tough old bird still hung on to life. He sank his fangs deeply into the old man and drank just a little blood. He could feel the conjurer's power course through him. "Far more taste than I would have guessed," said the vampire. The old man threw the powder in the vampire's face. It caught Irenaeus off guard, but he recognized it immediately by its odor as a poison, which would have been instantly fatal to a mortal, but meant nothing to him. "Your last conjure is up, heathen," Irenaeus said. Irenaeus now dropped the crucifix, as both his fear of the old man's magic and his pretense to Christianity being anything but a means to an end for him were gone. Both hands freed, he pulled the old man in for the kill. The old man tried to push Irenaeus away with 3 gentle taps to the vampire's chest, but they were the weakest of blows, less than the fluttering of a butterfly's wings. But in his chest, the little raps continued, even after the old man stopped. Irenaeus did not feel right. He dropped the old man. The taps, now thumps, came louder and harder. Irenaeus's once again beating heart demanded the former vampire, now mortal again, draw breath, and as he did, the powdered poison worked its way through his bloodstream. The bishop fell over weakened and began to froth at the mouth. It took him several minutes to die. "Benedicto Christo," he said in his death throes, "Roma eterne," and the monster died the quietest death ever to befall a vampire elder. As the sun came up, the old man began to stumble and crawl out of the valley and through the evergreen trees. When he came to a Visigoth village where he was known, he still held on to some human life. By noontime, the village's healers had roughly scraped off his hair and beard to treat the old man's wounds and contusions, but the animal bite on his neck would not stop bleeding. By the setting of the sun it was fatal. The villagers deemed to bury the now bald and shaven corpse. The wise woman of the village was not as wise as the old man has been, for she did not see the signs that the old man would rise again, himself a vampire, the first of a breed of cross-fearing vampires suited for these dark mountains and dark forests in this dark age. But unaware of this, the wise woman instructed the men of the tribe to make burial arrangements. She knew little of the old man, only that he was the kindest and greatest healer in many lands, for he never took coin for his service. He had not known who his tribe had been or his name because of how young he was when the Romans took him, and he would never tell anyone the name the Romans gave him, for that was a slave name, and he shut it out of his mind once he escaped. He was known only by a single word, the only word of his own tribe's language besides prayers and incantations he remembered, for it was their term for a shaman and healer, and he knew it practically from birth. His father before him had been of the same trade, as had all the men of his line for many generations, but save that single word he remembered little of his people, and thusly by that word did all the people of the lands he had escaped to know him, though to their descendants the meaning of that word would be something hideously darker. So this title is all the wise woman would say to bless the old healer as the dirt was patted down on what would be his all too temporary grave, when cruel fate robbed him of rest and reunion with his ancestors in Mother Earth and Father Sky. She said a few words of blessing, and then as the villagers went away from the grave, looked back one last time and said softly, "Rest in peace, healer. Rest in peace, Nosferatu."